Good morning. We are in Ayin Beis in a review informed by the Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe, called Mika Hashem Lekenu, Hamakbil L'Sheves, as the Rebbe Rashab himself cites and indicates on page 1352. So that's where we are, 1350. So informed by those Maimorim, both for context as well as understanding the entire picture and flow of ideas and answers to the questions. So we're reviewing Ayin Beis with that perspective now. So we learned yesterday, what we reviewed yesterday was, after explaining briefly at least, a summary of the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe, of Ner Mitzvah, or before that, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, why it's called a candle, representing the purpose of the neshama and mission in this world to transform the physical world, the animal soul, into a divine vehicle, a divine fuel, which is all alluded to in the concept of a candle. Same thing with mitzvah. Ner mitzvah is also, its role is to transform the world and help with the animal soul as well, transforming that into a divine flame of Torah Eir. Being that mitzvahs and Torah go hand in hand. So Torah Eir is the full-blown Eir Atzmi, as he called it, where you get a full picture of what he said, Mepchinas Atzmus Eir Ein Sof Baruch Hu. And later, in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, he explained that's an Eir that's higher than all of existence and beyond existence. And ultimately, the goal is to be Mamshech, that Eir, that Gilui, all the way from the Etzem, all the way down below, without any change. That's Torah Eir. But the process of implementing it, like he calls it, the mitzvahs are the mechaber. Mitzvahs hena mechabrim es erat hatera ima adam ba'olam. That key line helps us understand the relationship between mitzvahs and Torah. So Torah ikran v'yiseidan. So though Torah is far more than a mitzvah, Torah is chachmasei shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. We say stako baraisa bara alma. God looked into the Torah and created the world. So it's a blueprint. It's shashuim lefanov. It always goes all the way back to Raisa B'Kudshabrichu Kulachad. But Torah's primary, so-called, if you wish, manifestation is through mitzvahs, as he calls it. Ikram v'Yiseidon is a language from the Alter Rebbe, who be mitzvahs. And those mitzvahs are the carriers, the mechabrim, between Erateri, Ma'adam v'Elam, and that means taking the animal soul. And all Dvarim Gashmim, they should all be included and encompassed in the Eir of Torah. So the world on its own, before neshama comes and does mitzvahs and mizmamshech Torah and through mitzvahs, what do we have? We have a world that's not aligned with Torah. Look at the world on its own; it follows its own interests. It's a dark world. Chesed kafla mechupul in the language of Tanya. The goal is to take this world created by the Creator, by the Hashem, by God, and aligning it with Him. That it should all be nichlul be'era Torah, that the seichel hativi, that human intelligence and natural intelligence should be transformed into chachmas haTorah. So in other words, our minds, instead of thinking about our interests and just material matters, or even things that are neutral, should be a mind that's aligned with God's mind. We should think as God thinks. We should look at the world and we should look at our lives in the way God would look at it. That's the avodah that the neshama does through Torah and mitzvahs, and the mitzvahs are the mechaber between the human being, the adam and the elam and Torah, and to transform it to chachmas alakis, which is not just wisdom, but chakim v'lei b'chachmi yediyah, as we discussed at length in the Mittler Rebbe, in the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. Okay, that's the first thing that we reviewed yesterday. And the next thing is the Nirali Levayah that just began by giving an introduction. Now we're going to go more in detail, which is the next paragraph on page 352, which begins 110 pages of a discussion that's primarily around the concept of eyesight, of riyah. The riyah is vision, is maybe the better word, vision. So vision is a key word because we take it for granted, perhaps, but the fact is our senses are not just one that we're auditory, that we hear things, or we experience it in other ways. Vision is a particular expression. And you also see in Torah the idea of seeing God, the visionary. Moshe saw God face to face. Yes, there's also the expression that you can't see me and live. We'll talk about that later. We talked about it in the past, but we'll discuss it. And L'Asad Lave, you'll see many of the prophecies all are about the Nigla Kfeid Hashem V'ro Kol Basa Yardav. Ayin Ba'ayin Yiro. V'lo Yikon Afeid Merecha. It says, V'lo Yikon Afeid Ro. It says, what's the expression there? Isa. Slipping right now, but basically you will see the master's face and there will no longer be a garment that conceals it, and so on. Other expressions there you go, right, yeah, and the right, and other expressions of Riyah and vision. And clearly you see that vision, eyesight is all used as expressions about the ultimate experience of the divine is seeing it. By Matan Torah, we learned in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, the explanation, they saw. Cholam roim nesanishma, b'shem mesanira. So there again, you see the Riyah. The Rambam explains that the main reason that the reason that we accept Matan Torah is because we saw it with our own eyes. Ein rov v'lo zor. It wasn't just a matter of, it wasn't because of miracles, it was because we saw, we witnessed it with our own eyes. So the Rebbe Rashab says, to understand this inyan, and when you say inyan, you could say limited to Torah, but clearly he's talking about the whole picture of how we transform ourselves and the world to be able to be channels for Elokus through mitzvah and then Torah. The ultimate gilu is Torah. And remember, this section is talking all about Torah in contrast to Tefillah Malmata Lamayla. And Torah gives us a picture. God is Ata Hareisa Ladas. There you go, another Hareisa Ladas. That you appeared in a way that we saw, Hareisa Ladas. Interestingly, earlier in volume 2, when he spoke about V'yadaita Hayem V'shavesa Levavecha Ki Hashem Elokim, there he said that's Malmata Lamayla, V'yadaita. It's our mitzvah to know God, Hashem Elokim, and to be miyachid Elokus with the world and ourselves. Ata Reisa Ladas, he said in volume 2, when he began this discussion, is Mamayla Lamata, by Matan Torah, because it's a Torah Dika Gili. And that is, it's actually a critical piece, which I'll refer to as the beginning of the, I believe it's the beginning of the Shavuos Maimer in Tafresh Ayin Hey, where he says that very explicitly. It's on page, here we go, page 996 in the edition that I'm using, this 3-volume edition. So he says there, let me just look at it because I think it may be very helpful here. Yeah. Gam Sarach Lahavan, he asks, Mashakosav Yadaita Yem Kavayo Elikim, Halik Far Nemat Atare Saladas. Yeah. So he answers in general, Ata Reis Ladasu B'derech Mamayla Lamata. The Mashkos of Haresa, who Shanim Shalem Mamayla, B'chinis Hariyah, B'mahuz V'atzmus, Ein Sof, U'b'mahuz V'atzmus Da'avayev Elikim. I'm reading on page 996. And he goes that Kidua, that goes on Matan Torah, and also the Dibres, Sersa Dibres were Gili Amahus, B'chola Am Royim Es Ha-Kelis, Royim Es Ha-Nishma. I'm reading it very deliberately because this connects to what we're learning now. But this is a Torah. This is not Tefillah Malmata L'mayla. V'yadaita Yem is like Tefillah Malmata L'mayla, as we're going to learn. So you see, he keeps emphasizing, and they saw the true unity of God, the true divine unity. Like the neshama in its root sees Havai Lakim Kol Echad. Remember, the neshama in its root is similar to the Koyach Hariyah in the Etzem HaNefesh, where there's no limitations, as we discussed yesterday, and we're going to learn soon. he goes on to explain how it's all perceived and it's like through vision. Yeah. And he says that even when you need to have seichel, intelligence, to understand God, that's in order that it should be a hergish pnimi, it should integrate more. But the fundamental experience was one from above that was revealed to them, like having a vision and clearly a riyah. How he goes on to speak about this. And by Matan Torah, the root of the soul was revealed. That's why every dibur, every one of the 10 commandments they heard, their neshama expired. Because there's the revelation of the makifim of the neshama, and that's ata haresa, the ata ba'asmacha haresa lamata hanesheres shemaka nishmascha. That means that you yourself, atzmus, revealed yourself below, which means lamata hanesheres shemaka nishmascha. That is the sheres shemaka, the root and source of your neshama.
This is higher than Torah, no?
One second, let me just finish. Okay, then he continues. It's worthwhile reading. I think it's going to help. Like we see in the future.
Is that still 396? 996
I'm now
or
on 397. I moved to the next page. Like in the future, Ayin Beis, he's bringing these psukim that I mentioned before, which are actually cited in Tanya, chapter 36, when he talks about this. So, Ro kol basar, Ayin Be'ayin Yiro, you'll see eye to eye. Kamoi kein hoye b'matan Torah. So too was it by Matan Torah. The kol zeh, is gilim el maila, shehira lehem amitis elikus. That was a gilim el maila that it was revealed to them, was shown to them. This the mitis of elikus, the truth, reality of the divine. In other words, it's not something that comes on its own. It was revealed to them. And the gili was from the top down. The bizgalas asma and said, Baruch hu memela nira v'nigla eich dekula kamei klo chashiv. That when asma said himself is revealed, then automatically it becomes obvious and clear how everything is nullified in his presence, before him. Everything is mizbatel, nullified before this gili, and they see how Hashem echad. And he continues. I'll continue to read. By Matan Torah, even though there was this gili that he's talking about, however, it did not refine, and they did not completely become bottled. That's why afterwards you need the avodah, like he says. Ach yeshlemer. However, we can say the neshamis is so ro eich shamata bottle beemes. So though it didn't transform the whole world, and we still need, that's why we're still here in Golas, because we still need the avodah. But at the time, they got a taste. They saw how the mata, how existence, it's like having an epiphany, a vision, how the entire existence is bottled be'emes, the liyasha behem hayagili b'chinis pnimius. The world was not transformed, but the neshamas, there was a gili pnimius at that time. Al kein ro eich shamata bottle. That's a yeshlema from the Rebbe Rashab. So they saw how existence, the mata, meaning this material world, is bottled to elikus. So we spoke yesterday, for example, when you're able to see godliness in this world, that's the picture they had at the time of Matan Torah. This is all ata reisa ladas, mamayla lamata. This is all through Torah. So it's actually what we're learning now is very much the ata reisa ladas perspective. However, here he's really focusing on v'yadaita hayem. So he says, omnam, mashakos v'yadaita hayem. However, when it says v'yadaita, that you shall know, it's a mitzvah to us. You shall know today. It's not saying what happened, that God revealed himself to us. It's saying, here's a mitzvah that today you should know. He says, "Hu b'chinas mamata l'mayla." This is mamata l'mayla from the bottom up. Sha'odam yibay hayidiyah v'hakoda. It's telling us that the human being should have the awareness, or I would say the perception and the awareness and the recognition, b'koyach atzmei, with our own effort. Eich sh'Hashem hu elikim. V'yidayta hayem v'shaves levacha ki Hashem hu elikim. So this is telling us what we need to do from the bottom up. V'yidiyah b'derech mamata l'mayla. And this idea, this on perception, this perspective is from the bottom up. That you begin with Shem Elikim, which means how godliness is manifest and concealed in nature. Elikim is Gematria HaTeva. And from Elikim, you work your way up to recognize the true recognition, how Havayahu Elikim, that the truth is, this Elikim, the divine energy within existence, within nature, is really one, is with Havaya. Havaya is Hu Elikim. With Havaya, the divine that's beyond existence. Vahu. And he continues, Shad Simtsum Vahelim, Nevin, Shemehat Simtsum, from the Simtsum and the Helim. In other words, we're not working our way from the top down, from the Gili down below, but from the bottom up. I'll stop in a moment if anybody has questions. Let me just read the whole flow here. That from the Tzimtzum and the Helam, Nevin, we should understand, or Novin, Eich da Havayu Elikim, how Havayu Elikim. So we're working our way up from a concealed divine presence, the concealed divine presence in existence, to Havayu Elikim. V'gam b'haseder v'hadragam matal ma'ila tchila, and it's also, when you go matal ma'ila, it's with a certain process, it's a certain order. You first begin with the lower levels, and this is good to emphasize, as I've discussed it many times. As we grow, we climb, and from there you go to higher levels. That you elevate from level to level, in the unification of Havaya and Elikim. That's the process of Yadaita Hayim v'Shavei Salvech ki Havaya Elikim. That is the order. That's the Seder. That's the way, the method of the Aveda that goes from the bottom up. That it has to be dafke with hadroga. Dafke with levels. And I was going to go back to what he said in the earlier pages, like we learned earlier on page 787, is ben Torah. The difference between Torah and Tefillah. The B'Torah Yechelim Leilach Gam Le'elo Medarga. With Torah, you're able to go higher than just level by level, because Torah is a Gili Mamayla, so like lifts you up, and it can propel you in a quicker way to higher levels. Shebe'im Yasik Gam Binyan Shalamayla Masagose. When a person is Yasik, he's delved, he's immersed, and exerts himself even the things that are beyond his understanding. Through Yigiyah, through effort, he can come to them. And he elevates in his comprehension. That even that when he does this, that he's able to understand even things, even people who are even things that are so-called lower levels in comprehension, understanding them in a higher way. Ubetfilah, by davening, however, im yelach le'ela medarga, no, in Torah you could learn something like we've been learning about atzmus, about all the different levels. We're learning things that are beyond our full understanding. How's that possible if you have to go step by step? How come? Because the mind, God gave us a mind that we can understand things even though we're not at that level yet. But by tefillah, im yelach le'ela medarga lo yifel mu'umah. In davening, however, if you try that, if you try to attempt to reach a level that's not in your level, it won't have any effect. On the contrary, you'll be delusional, basically. You'll be self-deceptive, self-deceiving, God forbid, because you're not on that level. So if a person, let's say, comes to V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, And in Torah, when you learn it, you can learn about high levels because your mind is going there. Your mind is able to comprehend deeper things. But experience, which is tefillah, mamata l'mayla, either you're there or you're not there. You can't fake it, so to speak, and you can't just imagine something that's not your level. You have to go b'hadroga in orderly fashion, dafka. First, the lower levels. And when he is Aveda, he goes according to commensurate to his level, asas monsech. In other words, that which is expected of him, or is monsech means almost demanded of him or expected of him, according to the inyan that is his level. So when he goes in a realistic manner and not trying to and not fooling himself into being a level where he's not at, then he'll have the capacity. He'll then have the capacity to climb step by step. But if a person tries to jump the steps, it won't work. Let's see if I want to continue reading. Yeah, I think that's enough for now. He just concludes.
So are you starting the Torah or you're starting the tefillah?
One second, let me finish. And this is the Yadai Tayyim, that's B'derech Mamata L'mayla. And Mashkab Shemayim Al Oris B'tach Hazeo Ba'beis Madrigs Davai Lekim Erisef Abligul Erish B'midu Gvul. Okay. Davai Lekim is both the Eir L'mayla Milk Bowl, and like I said. And that's where he says that Ein Eid comes to add that the Helam itself gets transformed, which is explained later in volume 3. So this is a good piece to read because it's very connecting to the ideas we've been speaking about, especially the transition from Mamat L'mayla to Mamayla L'mata on page 1350, where he goes over from Tefillah to Torah. So I'm very glad that I read this, both for myself and for everyone. So it's like a type of another connector in the whole context of things. And to go back to where we are, this leads us to Torah that we're learning. We began learning, and we'll talk about Riyah. The point I got to here was all about Riyah. That Riyah is an experience, in this case, but we're going to learn how we work on it, how do we achieve that level of Riyah that becomes something internalized. And that's going to be part of this whole discussion of Eir HaRiyah that we're going to review now and the next classes. Okay. See if people were biting at the... Go ahead, if anybody wants to ask anything.
396 page?
996 and 997 I just read.
I'll post them in
this
the thread
explanation
after
that
class.
you had just... Thank you. This explanation, how is a person studying? First, you need the Torah. You're not reaching it right away, but the Torah is giving you the care for the Avodah Melamato, correct?
He doesn't discuss that here. You could say the other way around. Matan Torah was 26 generations after Brias Elam. So Mamata L'mayla came first. Anyway, it's a separate discussion.
Nothing happened.
What do you mean? The Ovis did Aveda, tremendous Aveda, Mamata L'mayla. Point being is, we're going to get to that later. I don't want to go there right now. Which comes first and who does what? We're talking about two Sidrei Aveda. I mean, it's a good point to discuss which brings to what, but it both goes away. The truth is that in the every day we start with Tefillah, Beis HaKnesses, Beis HaMedrash. We learn Chassidus to help us daven, but generally the order is Tefillah and then Torah. But you could also go Torah and Tefillah. It's not a contradiction. It's not etched in stone which way you begin. You can go either way. If you talk about that, Torah tells us the mitzvah of Tefillah, because how do we know how to daven? The Torah tells us, V'avadtem es Hashem Elokeichem. That's another thing. Everything goes through Torah. Shuv also goes through Torah. But bottom line is, we're not bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah till 12, 13. That means chinuch is more of a mamata l'mayla experience than mamayla l'mata. and then we prepare ourselves, and then we get the Gilim Mamayla Mata. But even after Matan Torah, there's plenty of work to be done, as he alludes to here. But we'll discuss that later. I don't want to go there right now. Right now, I wanted to speak more about the two approaches and also explain why Riyah plays such a central role here. So there's things we see from how we see things, and then there's things that we see that are shown to us. Atares Ladas was shown to us. Ultimately, the goal is that we see Elikus through our Aveda, and there's a joining of the Mamayla Lamata and the Mamat Lamayla. Remember, the goal is to have both Milas together. Each one has something the other doesn't have. That's why we need both, and they will join together, as we shall discuss. That's when I'll discuss how they work with each other. Right now, he's still discussing the two approaches. It also helps us understand what I pointed out in a few classes back, where he said on page 1348 and 1349, where he said these words, that through Teda, you get Mamay Lamata, Ena Kelim Esim Be Tmuna. Adrab, Kfi Efna Eru Tmuna Sakeli. Yeah. In other words, that Torah gives us a picture from above that etches the picture below. So it's Mamayla Lamata. And based on what we just learned, what I just read on page 996 and 997, it's very clear. That's Atares Ladas. By Matan Torah, God appeared to us. He showed us what Elikus looks like, and we were able to see that the Mata, even existence itself, was only really Elikus, bottled completely to Elikus, as he said. As we just learned, the Yesh Lemer. Any other questions?
But the purpose of Matan Torah was in order we should be able to make the Aveda Milamato, correct?
And the Aveda before Matan Torah was in order to be able to receive Torah. It goes both ways. As a matter of fact, in the end of the second half of volume 1, he discussed at length the difference between the Aveda of the Ovis and the Aveda of Matan Torah, of Torah. That the Ovis did it Mamata Lamayla, basically the Lakus Lefiyerech HaNivroim. And by Matan Torah was an Ir Chodosh, a completely new revelation that gave us, yes, empower to now elevate even more. And the Osad Lave will be the joining of both. Anyway, especially Tanya chapter 36 talks about this briefly, where he says, Matan Torah, Kfar Hoyle Elam Me'enze, by Matan Torah is a taste of what will be La'osad Lave. However, the difference is by Matan Torah was the beginning of the process of this Gilead of Atzmos Ein Sof. Remember, by Matan Torah was the Bitl HaGzeira also Ben Elyenim V'Tachtenim. So until then, you could only go to a certain point. By Matan Torah, we were given the strength to join the two, Das Elyon and Das Tachten, essentially, if you wish, which we'll again talk about later. Yeah. Anybody wants to ask anything?
I have a question, which actually preceded you reading these passages, but it still brings it together. When you were summarizing yesterday's class, and you were saying that the purpose is ultimately to bring through Torah and mitzvahs and avoda, this idea of to transform the sechel hanoshi, the sechel chachmas Torah, chachmas elokis, bechinas chakim velo bechinas vidya. So this idea, my question is about this level of sort of this chachma of, I guess, atzilus. It's not really a knowing; it's more like a bittul. Is that the ultimate sort of practical culmination? I mean, as far as how we can understand our ability to access Elokus is not so much really knowing God, but really being bittul before Him. So you can know Him by essentially realizing there was only Him, and that the rest of our own trappings are, you may say, illusory. I'm trying to understand this connection with this concept of chakim velo bechinas yediyah.
Lo b'chachma yediyah.
Thank you. Lo b'chachma yediyah.
Well, I've explained this just for the record many, many times at length. I'll just sum it up. This expression is actually from the Maimer and the Alter Rebbe's Maimer. The Alter Rebbe brings this quote, and The Mittler Rebbe elaborates on it. Briefly, if you recall, we've spoken a number of times, what is Chachma exactly? Is it intelligence or is it experiencing a higher reality? So we assume that it's intelligence. The beginning of intelligence is the spark of an idea that ultimately later is fleshed out in Bina and then integrated in Das and internalized. The truth is, we were given Chachma, as I just alluded to as well, when we learn, we're given, a human being is given intelligence that, like he says in Tanya, that we can transcend our emotional impulses by concentrating with our minds on something that's beyond ourselves. So wisdom and intelligence is really about experiencing a reality greater than ourselves. No, it's not just one that's subjective, defined by our egos and our self-interest. So Chachma is the channel, the interface, if you wish, a pathway to experiencing transcendence. Animals don't experience transcendence because their intelligence is primarily focused, like a nefesh habamis, like animals' intelligence, on survival, on finding a mate, on breeding, on protecting their young, on hunting. Essentially survival-based. It's not about exploring the heavens and trying to understand God. An animal doesn't have the mitzvah v'yadaita hayom and atares ladas. They do what God wants them, the clockwork of the program of existence. They're part of the art. A human being is given by the artist the ability to access the artist, and that's through transcendence. And Torah is the way. God gave us a Torah. Torah allows us, when we learn Torah, we're understanding God. And essentially, what we want to do is transform human intelligence, which again, as you see, science, for example, is brilliant. But at the end of the day, it's human intelligence. As brilliant as it is, as much as it could change the world through technology, it has a limit. But when you are able to access and take that seichel of the nefesh habamis and bring it to understand godliness through Torah, then what happens is that the mind is beginning to experience a reality that's greater than this existence, beginning to understand the artist, not just the art. Scientists understand the art. They understand the world. They understand its dynamics. They dissect it. They take apart its anatomy, and they develop technologies based on that. But if you may recall, we spoke about that. Ultimately, a scientist can only come to the Big Bang. He can only come to the Ayin, Yesh Ma'ayin, to the beginning of where the Yesh begins. What happened before the Yesh is outside of the realm of human intelligence. However, Chachma of Torah takes you into the Ayin, into the world of Ayin, into the world of the divine, where you go with Chachma, you're going, but you come to realize the expression of wisdom, but not knowable wisdom as it's knowable to us as human intelligence. So it's essentially an experience, an intelligent experience. But like when you say Tachas Yediyah Shalei Neda, you come to perceive the imperceivable. You come to understand that which initially may have been beyond us, and that becomes part of our mind. So we're coming to understand not just God as a wise God, but also the source of wisdom, which is beyond wisdom. When we talk about going to the higher levels of Atzmi, or levels even higher than that. And Chachma is the place where it resides. Like we learned, Keser transmits into Chachma, and Chachma is Koyach Ma, the ability to receive and absorb that which is greater than itself. And then this Chachma, as it's mamshech into Bina, and we learned in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, if you recall, he learned how Chachma receives from higher, and then transmits that into Bina, into the lower levels, the two steps in the process. So essentially, Chachma becomes an interface, essentially, between existence and beyond existence. So Chachma Yediyah is a part of that understanding, that is both wisdom, but you come to understand God is wise, but not in the knowable wisdom as we're accustomed to. Just like you say God, you could say God is chesed, but his chesed is beyond the chesed as we know it, the limited chesed. So basically, it's like almost saying, you can't say God is wise, but you can't say he's not wise. So you say that he's not wise. In other words, he's not defined by wisdom, but wisdom contains something that's beyond the wisdom. And it all comes together because God also created wisdom. So it's an integration between the structure and beyond structure.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. That's a heck of an answer. My goodness. Wow. Thank you.
Yeah. But it probably, I mean, I'm sure it jogs some memories that we have. You remember the idea?
Yeah, for sure. Oh, of course. Of course. Yeah, of course. But just the way you put it all together was very helpful.
No, good.
Mind blowing.
Fine.
Pardon the pun. I said mind blowing. Pardon the pun.
That's good. I got it. The mind and
Yeah.
blowing. That's chakim v'lei b'chacham.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Of course,
Okay.
yeah. It's just a lot to remember.
No, it's fine. I especially went over it because it's an important point and needs to be reinforced and explained and reintegrate. You know, these ideas are that's the whole point here. We're trying to draw down ideas that are beyond us into us. So it's going to always be a challenge.
100%. Thank you again.
Yeah. Anybody want any other comments?
This is a beautiful and a major and clear explanation about what Torah is and the difference between Chokhmah, science, technology. Very powerful.
Yeah. Remember, I if you recall, it was something I struggled with years ago in the Maimorim of Chassidus. And some Maimorim, it talks about that Chokhmas Ha'adam or Chokhmas Hamada, basically science. When a person learns it, they become more yesh. When a person learns Torah, they become more bottle. So I always wondered, practically speaking, I know scientists that are very humble people. Not all, it's not guaranteed, but there are. So when they learn science, they don't necessarily become more arrogant. There are many that do, and some that don't. And I know people who learn Torah that become very arrogant and are very arrogant. So I always wondered, what does that mean in the Maimer? Is it automatic? You learn science, you become a bigger yesh, and you learn Torah, you become bottle. So then I came to realize, learning more Maimorim, that the meaning is a lot deeper than that. It's not, obviously a person has free will. You can learn Torah and be a big yesh as well. And you can learn science and be a very humble, God-fearing person. Science is not a bad thing. And it says in the Gemara that Torah could be Sam Chayim and Sam Movis. It could be like a medicine that heals. It could be a toxin that poisons if it's used the wrong way. So I think it means what I said now. It means that when you learn science, it's not that you become more arrogant. You're learning about the yesh. You're not learning about ayin. So the more you learn, the more you're understanding the yesh. So it doesn't matter, it's not whether it personally affects you that you become more arrogant, but it's more about us. So we understand. So it's like someone who knows more who I am, more self-awareness, so to speak. Whereas Torah is teaching you about something that's a reality that's beyond us. It's teaching you about ayin, where it came from, about God. So Torah basically takes you into another realm altogether that's beyond existence. Science is not meant to take you there. Even though, frankly, good scientists will say that they're studying God's mind, and that many scientists will say they stand in awe. The more science they learn, the more awe they are of God. So that's where they meet. The Chokhmah Anushi, Seichel Anushi, could meet Seichel Eliki, like, we've been learning. So it's not a contradiction. But science itself is still the understanding of existence. Science is not metaphysics. Science is not coming to tell you about the 10 spheres or about what's going on before the Tzimtzum. That's not a scientist's realm. A scientist has to use empirical instruments, empirical logic, and prove things and demonstrate them and replicate. There's a scientific method. You go, God forbid, somebody goes for surgery, a heart surgery. You want a scientist there. You don't want a Torah person. You want a Torah person to daven for you. But the actual surgery has to be done by someone that understands the science of it, the medicine of it. On the other hand, Torah gives you a picture of what God thinks, how God sees the whole thing. So by nature, it's teaching you about the ayin. Now, practically speaking, if you learn it properly, Torah will bring you to more bittul, and science may not. But again, that's part of what I've over the years I learned and understood. That's what the Maimorim most likely mean, more than just purely what effect it has on us. It's also what you're learning about. Anyway, just a little more embellishment on this topic.
On this topic, is it only through Torah you can get to that level of Hakim V'lo B'Chachma Yediyah, or also through Avodah Melamata Lamaila, through our service, through prayer, essentially?
Well, through Torah, Mamai Lamata is easier, because Torah is is given to us. You open up a Torah, you're learning what Hashem is saying. but you could reach it through Mamata Lamaila as well. You know, if a person is learning, let's say, science properly, and they get their ego out of the way and self-interest out of the way, the wisdom of nature is, at the end of the day, the wisdom of God. God created the subatomic particles. God created electricity. God created all the forces that science is trying to understand. So I can see someone studying that. The Alter Rebbe writes in Torah in one place that there were great scientists, great thinkers who their whole business, they were all busy was understanding godliness. They saw it through nature. I would say that the best of both worlds is having a combination of both, where you work in it mamat l'mayla, and then you also get a gili l'mayla mat. Like, for example, when someone finds the interface between a Torah idea and a scientific idea, that's like that's amazing. That's like the best of it all, because it's being confirmed l'mata l'mayla while also being seen l'mayla l'mata.
100%. Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of time. I mean, it's one of my pet peeves where I very often, pet projects, so to speak, I very often try to find the parallels, whether between and Ein Sof and the concept of light and light particles and waves in physics. There's been a lot of different parallels that are fascinating. And I think there you find a place where they both, in a way, complement each other and are integrated.
This is only if you have the theoretic view that you know that the Lamaila Migvul and Gvul, everything is godliness. Then when you're learning the science, it's becoming part of godliness. But if
That's
you're
true,
learning
but I can tell you there are people who've come to understanding God, Mamata Lamaila, and they never saw Torah. Or you could say that itself is Torah, but they never really learned Torah, and they did come to it through their own journey. You can't. That's undeniable, and some reach very high levels. Now, with Torah, it would go even deeper and higher. But there is a possibility. I mean, you find this in other schools of mystical thought that have certain truths in them. It's not, I mean, I've much to say about Jewish mysticism versus, let's say, Buddhism, but you cannot say that Chachma B'goyim Tamin, that there is wisdom that you can reach even if you don't have Torah, direct Torah. I'm not saying the effect of Torah on wisdom. That's another story. That even you could, that hypothetically you could come to understanding godliness through, remember, Mipsari Echze Elakah.
Isn't that what Abra?
One second. Mipsari Echze Elakah, from my flesh I behold God. That means by studying human anatomy, by studying nature, Marabu Masecha, you can come to understand godly ideas. Now, obviously, with a revelation of Torah, this goes back to, again, what did they understand before Matan Torah and what happened by Matan Torah? So, no question, and the artist himself comes and reveals himself, is going to definitely teach you about the art, things that you didn't figure out on your own. But you can't say that you can't come from the art to understanding certain, at least to some extent, what the artist is like. That's how I would use the analogy in this context.
Avram Avinu had
That's what I was going to say.
He went to yeshiva, ever shame and ever that yeshiva. So I mean, he didn't have.
Yeah, but before he went to yeshiva, he was searching, and he was already recognizing. But even at 3 years old, he recognized God, the Creator. It wasn't the yeshiva that taught him about it. The yeshiva was part of the process, and also was not Matan Torah. It was all informal. He did not receive Torah as we did. Ata Reisa Ladas did not happen before Matan Torah. But anyway.
The one distinction you could make, I mean, there are many distinctions you could make, but even though you could perceive and have an appreciation of the fact that the Creator made this perfect world by, if you, let's say, look at a leaf under a microscope and you see the perfection of the thing and how it's so beautiful, it doesn't enable you to communicate with Hashem. I mean, like, this is what we're learning. I guess. I mean,
yeah, but one second. But what about the people who, through meditation and contemplation on that leaf, turned their heavens to the sky and spoke to the Creator in their own language?
Well,
what would you
that's
say about
true
that?
too. Well, I guess that's Yeah, touche. I guess that's true. I mean, so
And this is not a, listen, my point here is not a competition here. I don't see
Yeah.
a contradiction at all.
no,
I know
no.
people who never learned Torah, and they're one of the most spiritual people I've ever met, more than people who've learned Torah, to be frank. So I've seen that. That's why I'm speaking with this confidence. It's not like, and on the other hand, I'm not in any way saying that Torah would not enhance the experience and go even further. I mean, it's like the same idea. Hillel said the entire Torah is loving another, right? Don't do unto others that you don't want done to yourself. And so people ask the question, 1 second, there are a lot of people who study Torah and they're not so loving, and there are people who don't study Torah and they're very loving. It's the same context. If you study Torah properly, you'll be the most loving person. A person who has not studied Torah or has never been exposed to Torah is loving. Great. No one will say that you can't be a loving person unless you study Torah Parsha every week. However, I would say if you study Torah, you'll be even more loving. It'll teach you new levels. So it's not look. Mamat l'mayla and mayla lamata are not mutually exclusive. You always will need both in each. Even by Matan Torah, the Jews said Nasav and Ishma. They were there. They showed up. It wasn't just completely from above. It was primarily from above. So every mamata l'mayla has a mamayla lamata in it, and every mayla lamata has a mamata l'mayla in it. Just keep that in mind as well. You know, Avram Avinu, technically speaking, it was not revelation that began his journey. He began his journey the opposite. He grew up in an idol manufacturer's home, and by process of elimination, he came to discover that what he was taught was false. And he came to realize there's something greater. And then God responded. Till he was 75, it was no Lech Lecha. Lech Lecha Avram was already 75 years old. He was quite a mature person with a lot behind him. So it's always a joint effort. That's the bottom line. You do your little part, God responds. You do more, God responds. Sometimes there's grace, and God will lead the way and give you a gift, and then you should respond. I mean, it can go both ways in both directions. There's no rule in this context. Obviously, from our end, we have to constantly make the keli as much as we can, the containers, to do our part, and then the blessings have where to reside. But there's no question that God could be merciful and kind and send you a gift that you didn't necessarily work at, or maybe you worked at it years ago and now you're receiving. I mean, these are part of the complex mechanics, cosmic mechanics of how things work back and forth. So it's all correct. There's no real black and white formula to say this one knows it, this one doesn't know it, you know?
Is it applied to Goyim, what you've been talking about, just having working on yourself? And
Absolutely. Absolutely. They have Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noach, as I said many times, that if all the Jews kept the Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noach, the 7 Noahide laws, we'd have Mashiach here, right? The 7 Noahide laws is basically the 10 commandments without honoring your parents and without Shabbos. So it's quite fundamental. And a non-Jew has a responsibility to be moral and ethical and to be as divine as they can. They also have a soul, creating the divine image, etc., etc. Goes back to topics we talked about many times in the past. The question between the difference between Jews and non-Jews is another discussion, which I don't want to go into here at all. It's not relevant to this discussion. For example, it says in the Gemara that a non-Jew who learns Torah is like a Kohen Gadol, the high priest that goes into the Holy of Holies. And the Rambam says something similar at the end of Hilchos Shemitah V'Yovel. How do you explain that? Then it says someplace a Goy is not supposed to learn Torah. So the answer is he's learning the Torah that's relevant to him, the Sheva Mitzvahs. Learning that Torah makes him like a high priest going to the Holy of Holies. That's a pretty high level.
wow, that's good to know.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is,
Every time you see a non-Jew, you should think there's a potential high priest there.
going back to the point that 2 minutes ago you spoke about it, that even if you see very high scientists that are reaching very high, but they don't reach without Torah, without Chassidus. They don't reach these ideas. Hakim v'lo b'chokhmah yediu. They are very overwhelmed with
would you be
godliness,
surprised?
but they don't have this.
Would you be surprised if I showed you poets like
They don't
William
have
Blake?
this understanding.
1 second. Let's say, would you be surprised if I show you books literature written by non-Jewish thinkers and poets like William Blake and others that actually
Yeah, they
describe
believe
Chak
in,
and V'lei.
but not
One
this
second, let me just finish.
understanding.
One second, let me just finish. That they actually describe in detail the concept of Chak and V'lei b'chachma yediyah. They actually talk about it. They don't use the Hebrew, but it's a very similar idea. You're asking how high they can go without Torah? It's a fair question. I can't answer that right now, but I've seen quite amazing things coming from that direction.
So what's the big thing about Chassidus?
Is this it's to me, this is off topic of what we're learning now. It's a whole other discussion that I've spoken about at length many times. I don't like to use the word competition. You're putting it in a very competitive way. Who's better? Is Chassidus better than that? Why not just use the expression in the Chochma Bagoyim Tamin? There is Chochma Bagoyim, Torah Bagoyim Lo Tamin. So there's the concept of Chochma and Torah. Now Chochma means real Chochma. We're not talking about false wisdom. So my point is, there's a point where they join. Obviously, when God reveals himself, like I said, an artist reveals himself, is going to be greater than the person studying the art. As high as they go, they're not going to see it necessarily the way the artist sees it. But that doesn't mean they can't reach high levels. You're asking now to explain the difference? I leave it to everybody to figure out. You could, I'm sure, think about milas of Matan Torah that scientists could not reach on their own. Of course there is. Even Talmidei Chachamim, Avram Avinu, did he reach what happened at the Reis Ladas? And Avram is a pretty high level, not a scientist. Did Avram have what Matan Torah gave? No, he didn't. Matan Torah is a chiddush even for Avram. So obviously Torah adds things that when God reveals to us things about his own personality, like the Yud Gimel Midas Harachmin. I don't think any scientist would ever come to that. That needed a revelation from above, just as different revelations from Torah. As far as the understanding of godliness, that's already a bigger discussion. The challenge is going to be as follows. You could put two people in a room. One is a brilliant non-Jewish mystic, and another is a Litvish Talmid Chacham Lahavdil. And let them both talk about God. You'll be surprised what you're going to hear. Right? So I understand you mentioned the word Chassidus. So Abshemi, you're the one that told the story about what happened when you were in the yeshiva in Brisk, right? About God.
Yeah. So you
So
said
they
it
had a
now.
lot of Torah there.
It's somebody that didn't learn Chassidus is you said it so clear. Even a science, nobody is putting down the scientist that is so
And so
overwhelmed
I
with
said that
godliness.
what
This is
Torah
completely
Chassidus
different.
teaches is about the ayin. I agree. I didn't look. I did not say that the scientist, even the most brilliant, humble mystic, is going to arrive to the same level of ayin when you learn a Maimer Chassidus that talks about the ayin amiti, or the levels that we're talking about here, atar es ladas. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that they can reach high levels. With Torah, they would go even further. That's all I'm saying. I'm not suggesting that someone from a matla ma'ila can reach the same place as someone would get the gilu ma'ila lamata. I'm not saying that at all. So we're clear? Is everything clear or not? I'm just asking.
It's very clear to me, anyways.
Yes. This is a
Okay,
very
good.
interesting discussion, I think. I think it's
No,
an important discussion.
And at the end of the day, I think they complement each other. Matla ma'ila lamata. Each one has their big, and there's no question that I have not found personally in my own journey anything in mysticism of other schools of mysticism that was deeper than Chassidus, personally. That doesn't mean that everyone who learns Chassidus can see it. You can learn Chassidus and not necessarily experience these levels. And I have seen people, whether it's Buddhist or other schools of mysticism, Sufism and others, that are very profoundly mystical and profound connections. And to me, it's like you learn from everybody and everybody can complement each other. I would not suggest for a Torah person to have to go on a journey to the East and try to understand things from other schools of thought. I don't think that's a necessity. But there are many Jews, that was the only way they found God, was in the East, to be honest, because they were Tanekh Shanishba. The Torah they were taught was essentially bankrupt. Not the Torah, what the way it was taught. And so, maybe God planted these truths all over the world. And that, when people ask the question, for example, I know people told me that LSD, an acid trip, was the thing that brought them back to God. So I'm not going to invalidate their journey. Now that they came to God, they don't need that. But maybe God saved their life. Maybe it's like a medicine that saves a person who's about, I always say spiritual comatose person. And the only thing that can get him out of it was some type of hallucinogen, some psychedelic. And after the fact, by all means. But now that you've learned, then you can experience God without it. So there's many ways to look at this whole thing, if you really broaden the picture. Yeah. Yeah, very fascinating stuff for sure.
It's interesting.
Okay,
I was just going to say, I opened up a book called The Tao of Physics. Have you heard of it?
Of course, from Fridtjof Capra. It's a great book.
Yeah. So
it's classic. Excellent book.
Yeah, not to ruin it for anybody. But you read this on the first page. His point is that he studied many Eastern religions and then tries to apply their common principles in physics, which ultimately the bottom line is that he says everything is related to everything else. It's one unity, that everything is united. It's one integrated unity. What does that sound like to us? I mean, it's mind blowing. That's godliness.
It's an excellent book. And again, the ideas there, when I first read it years ago, are very parallel to many ideas of Chassidus. He even describes the concept of Bilta Metzias Nimtza. How do you like that? He describes the concept of non-existential existence. In a later chapter, you'll find it. And everything there. He began as an American physicist. He's changed his name to Fridtjof Capra, and he finds the parallels. It's basically the parallels between quantum mechanics and mysticism. Is essentially the essence of the book. What I found there, frankly, mostly was language. The ideas I knew from Chassidus, but the language is excellent there. It really confirms ideas that I did not find, even in the best people who taught Chassidus, did not have the language. He has excellent language there. And when you use physics, it really affirms a lot of ideas. So I've used lines from there in some of my talks.
Yeah, just fascinating. We happen to come on this topic here in today's class, but it's to Rabbi Teichtel's point. If
he quotes a lot of Wheeler and some of the physicists that really talk about, beyond paradox, the realities that are where paradoxes melt away and everything is, higher unity, as you said, and so on. Yeah.
But Rabbi Teichtel was saying, well, if you can obtain this kind of wisdom through humans' own contemplations, if you will, and he spun it without necessarily having access to Torah, to me, the fact that, this is a pretty thorough analysis, but let's say like William Blake coming up on some notion of transcendence, some notion of knowledge that is beyond the self, I think you were referring to. It's kind of like a philosopher stumbling onto a piece of Torah wisdom, truth, Jewish truth, but he stumbles upon it. Whereas Hasidus is an organized, systematic approach to understanding God and godliness and the nature of reality. It's just so you can a philosopher, even a very wise one, can stumble onto a core truth. But that's not the same thing as studying an entire system of belief, and
that's one point. But there are
I'm
some more
not so
points.
sure. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm also not so sure because if you read the Tao of Physics or William Blake, you're going to find very systematic. They're not just stumbling. They actually talk about it like a science. They talk about it in very graphic detail. So it's more than just stumbling. The question is, how do they come to it? So a few points I would make. First of all, human wisdom was created by God too. Why can't we say the human mind, which was created in the divine image, can come to certain things? The question is, what would, like, I always wanted to meet Fridtjof Capra or other people like that, or William Blake, just a different century, and talk to them and see if Chassidus, what Chassidus would add. So I think it would be a fascinating dialogue. You know.
Indeed.
I did have a dialogue like this, frankly, with Leonard Cohen. Leonard Cohen, who grew up with a lot of Zen.
Really?
Buddhist, yeah.
Is it recorded,
Wow,
or you
that's
just had
amazing.
it privately?
It's a
Is it
written.
recorded?
It's a written documentation. It's a written correspondence between us.
Oh, could you put that in? Can we see it? That would be
Is it on
fantastic.
your website? Is it on your website?
No. I never publicized it because I have it, but I never publicized it. As a matter of fact, after he died, I wanted to submit it to one of these big magazines like Atlantic or something, or one of these thought journals, but I never really did that either. I'm happy to share, but you have to keep it to yourself. I don't want to publicize it yet.
Huh? It's not too
That
late
would be
though if
pretty
you
cool.
change your mind, Rabbi.
And
No, I would love to publish it, but I don't want to publish it on COL. I want to publish it in a serious place.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Let me take a look at it. I was just gonna second your point basically about, I think that there is a mystical aspect to writing. And William Blake, he had a systematic way of doing things, but he meditated. I'm sure there were meditations that, not meditated in the strict sense of the word, but you go into some sort of a trance when you're writing certain things. And I do think that you can pull down some ideas because you're open to.
Look, what do you need more? It says there was no prophet in Israel that rose that was as great as Moshe. And Chazal say by Israel, but outside of Israel, Bilam was a prophet close to Moshe Rabbeinu. So among Israel, there was no prophet like Moshe, but among the nations, there was Bilam. So there's no question that you can have both prophecy and tremendous revelations from the bottom up and from the top down, even a non-Jew. I don't see any issue with that at all. Why? God is not limited where he reveals himself,
What a great discussion.
Totally.
Yeah. If we say
Totally.
leaders, that the heart of leaders and kings is in the hand of God, and these are political leaders or whatever, country leaders, empires, monarchs, and so on. I mean, I don't see any reason that God did not implant wisdom into some tremendously brilliant scholars, and not just, I'm not talking about technical wisdom, even mystical wisdom. Why not? But at the same time, it'd still be fascinating to see. I would love to be able to create a seminar where you cross-pollinate between the greatest mystics out there, we'll call it in the secular world, and Jewish mystics, Chassidus. That would be unbelievable.
That's a great idea. Let's do a Shabbaton. Seriously.
Well, you first have to find a few very legit, credible ones out there that would be willing to interact. I'm sure there are.
I'll also have to make sure that they like chant. No, just kidding.
It doesn't have to be on our terms.
Yeah, that's true. That would be amazing if that could happen. That was another way to spread the Chassidus, to let them know that what they have whatever conceived actually has been around since they were born, before they were born.
I think I read a story about the Dalai Lama, that a Jewish person went to him and was a follower, and he said, "What are you doing with me? You have this great tradition. What do you want from me?"
It's true. I know the story with quite a few people who went to him.
We're still recording, Rabbi. I'm not sure if you're aware of that.
I know. I'm going to stop here. Let's stop here. We didn't really go further, but it was an important conversation. Still on page 1352.